My mom gave me a nickel to buy a pickle. I didn't buy a pickle, I bought some chewing gum. Chew, 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 chewing gum. How I love chewing gum. I'm crazy over chewing gum. I chew, chew, chew. My aunt gave me a quarter for soda water. I didn't buy the water, I bought some chewing gum. Chew, 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 chewing gum. How I love chewing gum. I'm crazy over chewing gum. What can I do?
Okay, I'm going to talk about chewing things today. I'm going to break with our chronological coverage of alcohol and talk about other things which are indeed sometimes intoxicants, sometimes not. But, and I think, if we think about things that we chew, we might assume that chewing gum and resins and leaves and other non-nutritive substances, that somehow that's universal, that people have always done that across all time. And there are, of course, examples from around the globe, chewing chicle among the Aztec and Maya, or mastic in ancient Greece. The word masticate actually comes from that word mastic. Spruce gum you find chewed among Native Americans, not to mention stimulants such as tobacco, betel nuts in Southeast Asia, khat in East Africa, kola nuts in sub-Saharan Africa, and of course coca in the Andes, which is a very important source of intoxicants. So maybe our instinct would be to think that the urge to chew is fundamental to our species, right? It's a kind of rudiment of the early hominid diet, which would have included tough bark and leaves and sinewy, uncooked animal tendons and things like that require vigorous chewing, and that maybe we are, in fact, hardwired physiologically and maybe psychologically to enjoy chewing even when food isn't involved. That perhaps precisely because, in fact, in modern times, most of our food is soft and doesn't require so much, grinding of teeth. Maybe we need this to kind of get out our anxieties and frustrations. And so there may be some very deeply evolutionary reason that we like chewing, even though today we rationalize it in many ways. We think, oh, it's a breath freshener. It's maybe a way to release the pent-up anxiety. Maybe it's a way to stave off hunger or just mitigate boredom or something. But chewing is, one might argue, pleasurable even when it serves absolutely no identifiable purpose. It's just, some people crack a chew on the end of their pens or whatever. But the fact is, after having said this, I think chewing for pleasure and stimulation actually has not been universal historically, and many major civilizations never regularly chewed anything but food. So today I'm going to talk about a handful of stimulating chewables, and I'm going to leave coca for another lecture, and I'm going to leave tobacco for another lecture because that's an enormous topic. But I'm going to discuss khat and betel and cola, and then move on to gum, which, although it's not an intoxicant per se, I think does satisfy some deep urge that we have inside of us. And it, of course, fits into our larger discussion of why some substances are considered acceptable socially in ritual contexts, but they can also be stigmatized and thought of as déclassé or disgusting or even dangerous to health. So even though there's not a identifiable psychotropic quality to most gum, I think it fits very nicely into the kind of topics we've been talking about, and especially how the social meaning of a substance can change over time. So let's start with khat. This is spelled Q-A-T. It's a green leafy plant native to the Horn of Africa and Arabia. And what you do is you literally stuff the leaves in, a big wad of them, chew them, and then you keep adding more until you have this enormous bulge of cot in your cheek, and you just leave it there for hours. You chew on it, go on, and it contains an alkaloid stimulant. It's not that strong, but it functions like an amphetamine that induces a mild kind of euphoria, and it is considered addictive. Once you start using this stuff, you kind of need it. And it's fresh leaves, so it's also something you've got to get from a person. You can't store it around for very long. In some countries, in the United States and in Britain, it is considered a controlled substance. In Ethiopia, Somalia, Yemen, places like that, it's completely legal. So it's been used for thousands of years. This is not a new substance at all. Including ancient Egypt, actually, it was regarded as a kind of entheogen, surprisingly enough. It's mentioned in a lot of medieval Arabic texts. By the 11th century, it's mentioned in Al-Biruni, where it was considered to be a sour and cooling medicine. In other words, things that have sour flavors actually cool off your body's heat and can be used therapeutically. Now, interestingly, the social context of cot is also very interesting. It's almost only consumed by men, and almost always in a social gathering. You don't do it by yourself. You sit around in a circle or up against the wall around 2 in the afternoon, and you chew cot together with other men while conducting business deals. You can do it outside. You can also do it inside in a special room. And the whole idea is that it sort of perks everyone up. It makes them able to negotiate, and presumably the euphoria, allows them to compromise and get things done. So it's much like the sort of wine and beer before you have a faculty meeting, let's say. It's sort of when the bad news is broken, you feel a little tipsy, and then it doesn't seem so awful. Anyway, the most interesting aspect of cot chewing is first that the leaves have to be fresh. Okay, so unless you live where it grows, the way to get this is to have it shipped chilled by overnight air. There are businesses that send this stuff to primarily Yemeni and Somali communities abroad. And there's also a very fascinating debate about cot use. On the one hand, especially in Britain, where these communities are fairly large, on the one hand, gnawing away on a big pile of leaves seems kind of revolting. Okay, that's I think the prejudice. On the other hand, governments are kind of reluctant to ban it or prosecute anyone for doing this, because it seems sort of racist. It seems like they're pointing out a particular ethnicity and saying, you can't do this because we say and we think it's disgusting. And I think it's also, if you compare it to other substances that are legal, alcohol, tobacco, of course, cot doesn't seem very dangerous in comparison. It's certainly not as addictive chemically and much less harmful for health than tobacco. So, to argue on the one hand, you guys can't use this, but we can use the stuff that we've been using for centuries. So leaders, interestingly, within this community, kind of want them to assimilate and fit in with the general, British populace. And I'm thinking specifically about a community in London called Brixton. That's the area. And they're campaigning to actually get people to stop using it, because they just think this is going to be damaging to their health, and we don't want to seem like weird outcasts that are taking strange drugs. So, but it is still actually legal in Britain, but it's also a kind of marker of ethnic identity for those people who actually don't want to be assimilated and don't want to lose sight of who they are. So people who really kind of want to remember that they're Somalis or Yemenites, they chew on purpose, and they say, we're not going to assimilate, and we do this, and we're proud of it. We've always done this. Why should we suddenly stop because we live here? So there are not leaves per se, but similar kind of substances. These are mostly nuts, interestingly, that are not eaten, but they're chewed as a stimulant, and sometimes as a breath freshener, and sometimes as let's call it a social palliative, something that just sort of makes it easier to get along with people and be around them and interact with them. And the two most important of these are the areca, or what's called the betel nut, which is used throughout Southeast Asia. For recreational and actually for ritual purposes also, we'll come to. And then also the kola nut. You wouldn't think that this was, we all have tasted cola and soda, but it's a nut actually that comes from West Africa. And there is, undoubtedly something very soothing about the process of chewing these, right? It promotes contemplation, you kind of, and it seems, again, like we are hardwired to enjoy, this kind of, chewing, especially things that are like resist the teeth, like gum, right? And of course, that these two, the added advantages, they give you a little buzz. Okay, so let's start with the areca nut or betel. It grows on a kind of palm tree, and it's not chewed on its own. This is kind of unique among these substances. It's usually sliced and then wrapped in the leaf of a betel pepper plant. That's why it's called betel, not because the nut is actually a betel, it's the leaf that's the betel. And you fold this up into a little package, and it usually contains spices like cardamom and cloves. Even tobacco can go into these. And in India, this is quite common. It's called pan. Okay, it's this little, or a betel quid is what they'll often call it. Now, what's interesting is that also what has to go into this is a little bit of lime paste. And I don't mean lime the fruit. I mean calcium carbonate, which is an alkaline, catalyzes the vital alkaloids in the nut to release the things that cause euphoria. Okay, so it won't really work on its own unless you have this little bit of alkaloid lime, some powdered lime in there. Katechu or kutch is a dark tannic extract of an acacia species, is also sometimes added onto this. It's a kind of perfume kind of flavor. And in fact, if you look hard enough, you can find the dry, hard nuts themselves. You can find them in a good Indian grocery store, and I've found them actually here in Stockton. And I can tell you that if you eat them that way, they have absolutely no flavor and no effect whatsoever. You really need all these other ingredients to go in, and the leaves, the betel leaf, has to be fresh. It just doesn't work otherwise. So I had the, so it's actually hard to get here as a package, but I had the opportunity to taste this once in Oxford. A friend of mine who lived in India actually just put it in her luggage and brought a couple of these betel quids with her. And there we were standing on the balcony of an Oxford college, spitting this dark red stuff that looks like blood out of the balcony onto the sidewalk of this college dorm room. And it was just a bizarre sight. This beautiful young woman and me were spitting betel juice out. And whether the nut or the company induced euphoria, I can't really say. But strangely enough, the alarm went off in the building. Everyone had to evacuate. And I think they must have said, like, was someone murdered here or something like that? It was a very, very weird situation. But in any case, the redness that I'm speaking of that comes from chewing betel nuts makes your teeth red also. There's a wonderful song in the musical South Pacific. Bloody Mary's chewing betel nuts, and she don't use Pepsodent. And I think that's maybe how she got her nickname, Bloody Mary. I don't know, because she had red teeth. But that's she's never actually shown chewing, and her teeth were actually white in the film. So I don't know. But in the original musical, that's the idea is that through Southeast Asia they'd be chewing this stuff, and people do have red teeth. So these betel quids, as these little packages are called, it has its aficionados. It also has its detractors. It's usually chewed after dinner, both by men and women. Throughout India, you find it in Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, all the way through to the Philippines, Indonesia. They have it. So the whole South Pacific as well. They chew on these. And in fact, the word itself, the word areca, comes from a Malay word adaka, and so it's native to Malaysia. That's where they actually come from. In many places, there are ceremonial uses too. In Vietnam, it's actually used in a wedding ceremony because just as the idea is that the areca nut and the betel leaf are inseparable, so too should the husband and wife be. So if you go to an Asian grocery store, you can find these. Actually, I've bought them here because they're used in the wedding ceremony. And curiously, they are labeled if in the store in the U.S., in California at least, as I know, they're labeled for ceremonial purposes only, not for human consumption. But of course, people eat them, but they're not. But it's a considered a drug in the U.S. It's officially classified as carcinogenic also. And then the real problem of these is that you got to spit when you chew on it. It causes salivation, and you get rid of it, so you end up staining the sidewalks red, and it of course gives the impression that someone's been gushing blood. It looks disgusting. Okay, so the chewing of pan, however, is actually not a new or relatively new thing at all. It's a venerable antiquity. There's an ancient Sanskrit medical text, which is part of Ayurvedic medicine, the Sushruta Samhita, that explains that a betel leaf prepared with cloves, camphor, nutmeg, lime, the powder, an areca nut should be taken, chewed after meals, as it tends to cleanse the mouth, impart a sweet aroma to it, enhance its beauty, and cleanse the strength of the voice, the tongue, the teeth, the jaws, and the sense organs. And I'm actually going to I'll bring some into class. I don't know what I did with it now. Usually have a box sitting over here, but they sell it also in a little powdered form. Sometimes without the areca, it's just like spices and things, and you chew on it after a meal, and it does freshen your breath. But I'll bring some into class. But the text also says it soothes the body and prevents throat disease, and that the betel serves as vajikarana, which means things which promote sexual arousal, for which the treatise recommends various kinds of nutritious and palatable food, sweet, luscious, and refreshing liquid cordials, speech that gladdens the ears, and touch which seems delicious to the skin, clear nights mellowed by the beams of a full moon, and damsels young, beautiful, dulcet songs that charm the soul and captivate the mind, and the use of betel leaves, wine, sweet-scented flowers. This all sounds like very good medicine to me. I don't know, put them all together. But that's things that are aphrodisiacs, okay? So another substance, not related at all, but sort of that has its own very interesting social rituals around it, is the kola nut. And this is a stimulant that's chewed native to tropical West Africa. The flavoring, or at least what you drink in cola, is actually an artificially flavored simulacrum of the original. But in its original form, it's a nut. It's sliced and chewed, and the flavor is kind of bitter. But as you leave it in your mouth, it supposedly becomes gradually sweet. It contains a lot of caffeine. That's why I'm saying it is a stimulant. So it's great for staying awake. It's good when you're doing a fast. You can keep that in your mouth because it's not considered eating. And Muslims who do not use alcohol are very happy to be offered a slice. It's a kind of polite way to welcome a guest. When someone comes to your house, you will take a slice of the kola nut and you offer it to them, and they put it in their mouth, and you're all happy. And in some places, it is offered to chieftains on very special occasions. In Nigeria, they offer it to the ancestral spirits also. There is a system of divination called Ifa, which is among the Yoruba, and they use kola to appease a particular god. These are called orishas. They're the ancestral gods, and they all have a favorite kind of food. And there's one in particular called Oronmila, who's an ancestral spirit who really likes kola nuts. So when you make an offering to that particular orisha, you give some kola nuts, and then they'll be happy and they'll do things for you, which is really, really kind of interesting. Um, and the Hausa was one particular group in this area. Apparently eat so much of it that it also stains their teeth red, dark red. So remarkably, as with betel, and this is a coincidence, it's also featured in weddings. And it's something that you always share with the bride and bridegroom ritually. And so cola is kind of representative. It symbolizes not only the ability to come together and work out differences with individuals, but also a kola nut is usually hung in a young couple's house to remind them of the fact that they may have differences, but every time you sit and you have kola nuts together, you can overcome those differences and get along together. So the theme, this as a general theme, working out differences, also serves to remind people in this area who come from hundreds of different ethnicities, they have different languages, that in Nigeria, they wanted something to sort of symbolize the theme of unity among many different types of people. And so when Nigeria became a state, for the new coat of arms, they thought, let's have a kola nut. Let's put the kola nut on the flag, and that will symbolize people coming together, overcoming their differences. And so they took the motto, in fact, unity and faith. And if you look at the flag of Nigeria, the current black shield, there's a kind of wavy Y, which is supposed to represent the rivers, and it looks like behind it's a kola nut. I haven't been able to ascertain whether that's the case or not, but it kind of looks like, maybe it is. Who knows? There's also a very interesting scene in a great novel by Chinua Achebe, which is called "Things Fall Apart." And there's a scene in there where there is a kola nut shared ritually. The lines read this: "Who brings cola brings life." It sounds like an ad for Coke, doesn't it? And they did use that. In fact, Coke adds life. Isn't that what they said? Anyway, but in any case, the kola nut, like many other things we're talking about, has to be fresh. Okay, you can order some online, and I did, and I looked for it, and I guess it's for people who want to make real cola flavored soda, not with artificial ingredients. It's crushed into little pieces, and I tasted this stuff. It tastes of nothing. I don't know. I don't think it can be dry. So I guess the whole idea is you find some fresh and you share it with someone, but I've never tasted it fresh. So let's go on to gum. Europe really doesn't have a tradition of chewing until the introduction of gum, which happened about a little over a century and a half ago. Chewing gum also made a very sudden appearance in American culture. It's for this reason that chewing was at first stigmatized as being vulgar or animal-like, right? Sort of an animal chewing its cud. Or more surprisingly, and this is going to maybe surprise you, is that it's associated with young women who chew. And I think it took roughly about 70 years for the stigma against chewing to change in the US. And the story is really fascinating because it's the work of corporate advertising, directed specifically at older people, at serious men by and large, and to give it a sort of respectability, they did an advertising campaign which was very successful. And I think from the introduction of chewing gum commercially on the market, that happens in the 1840s, through the advertising and marketing revolution following World War I, gum is a perfect example of how the social and cultural meaning of food, or something that's near food, right? It's very close to stimulant also, can be revamped with a makeover by marketing and advertising. It's really, really a fascinating story. So let's start though at the beginning. So there are, of course, historical references to this mastic. Mastic is the resin of a tree, the lentisk tree, which grows only on the island of Chios. It was used in Greece, used by the ancient Greeks to sweeten their breath. But chewing gum went out of fashion outside of Greece, and it was a sort of odd, considered a very unusual thing in the rest of Western Europe when they heard about it. The Romans also chewed mastic on occasion, but it looks like after the empire fell and after classical times, there is, as far as I can tell, no reference to it at all for a good millennium. And when it does get mentioned, it comes in with the trade in spices that survived after the Crusades. We're not quite there yet in the course, but I think the latter Middle Ages, they start using mastic in all sorts of medicines and compound things, and it has a really pleasant, resiny, piney kind of flavor. It's really, really nice. And then when you get to the early modern period, any pharmacopoeia, any like list of drugs will include mastic, usually in combination with like aromatic spices and other drugs. And this was one way of taking these drugs, was to be chewed, not swallowed, not taken internally. And apparently people did in various times try to chew gum. Okay, and there's one story. I don't know if it's true. I have my doubts about it, but it's fascinating nonetheless. And let me read it to you. It says, a king of Spain was afflicted by a very offensive breath, to remedy which the physicians advised his majesty to chew a combination of gum mastic, ambergris, and other perfumes. And ambergris, remember, is a whale barf, basically, that floats in the water and gets this lovely perfume flavor. Actually, I have some somewhere in my desk. I'll bring it to class. And in any case, the use of this occasioned a great expenditure of saliva. So the courtiers, either out of compliment to their sovereign or what is more probable from the vanity of imitating their superiors, went very generally into the same custom. So everyone starts chewing and then spitting, I guess. The consequence was that those who followed the fashion with the most ardor lost their appetites and became emaciated, and consumptions increased so fast among them that the practice was forbidden by royal edict. In other words, it's making them sick, basically, lose their appetite, and so the king had to say, forget it, we're stopping this. And it must be the stuff, that the perfumes and things that they're putting in there. It's not the mastic itself. But very interestingly, the first direct European encounter with chewing gum, as we know it today, not mastic, in modern times, comes with the Spanish conquistadors. When they go to Mexico, the observers were perplexed, in particular by the very strong gender associations of chewing among the Aztecs. There's a guy who's sort of the first ethnographer of the New World. His name is Bernardino de Sahagún, who wrote this thing called The General History of Things of New Spain. And he mentioned that a lot of people there chew this stuff called chicle. Okay, the word chiclet comes from that word. It's the latex gum of a sapodilla tree. Remember, there's lots of different gums around the world, right? Some of them are resins and saps. Some are gum arabic, gum tragacanth. There's a lot of kinds, but this is latex from the sapodilla tree. And he says it's really popular among small girls, but once they get older, if they're married, they never chew it in public. When they use it in private, they do it to freshen their breath. And men likewise only ever do it in secret, because if they were to be seen chewing gum outside, it would make people would think they were effeminate. And in fact, the only men, he said, who chew it in public are considered sodomites. So Sahagún mentions that this association comes from the fact that prostitutes always chew chicle to make sure that their breath is fresh, right? And that they are making clacking noises with it in public all the time. And so other people don't want to be mistaken for a prostitute, I guess. This is why they never do it in public. And evidently Sahagún tried this stuff, and he said that it gave him a headache. I don't know if it was all the chewing or something inherent in the sap itself, but needless to say, among the myriad New World products which make their way to the Old World, so many foods, chocolate, tobacco, chili peppers, tomatoes, potatoes. There's tons of things go there. Chicle doesn't. It does not make that journey. Um, and um, I don't think people even tried chewing, which was really very interesting. In fact, another very interesting thing is visitors to the Ottoman Empire. This is, the current day Turkey and Greece, as late as the 19th century, mentioned how weird these people are chewing stuff, mastic, right? Especially women, and they considered that exotic and unusual. I'll read this to you. The ladies of the Grand Signor Seraglio at Constantinople, and I have to say, you can actually visit this this Seraglio. It's in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, and really, really beautiful and amazing. But in any case, the ladies there consume great quantities of it, chewing by way of amusement to preserve their teeth and gums and sweeten their breath, especially in a morning fasting. So when they wake up, they don't habitually brush their teeth. They chew something, and this makes their breath smell lovely. Okay, in the seraglio, these are kept women, the emperors, the sultan's wives. Okay, and apparently there was an official ruling among Muslim clerics, though, that even though you might swallow saliva while chewing gum, it doesn't break the fast during Ramadan. So, like drinking a glass of water would technically break the fast, but chewing gum, because you're not swallowing per se, is perfectly okay. So that's really, really fascinating how religion, of course, intersects with usage, justifying it or banning it. And as for chicle, how does it come back? How does it suddenly get rediscovered? Well, this happens in the 1860s. It was used to make a kind of chewing gum by a guy named Thomas Adams and his son. And if you know the company Adams Chewing Gum, that's still around. That was founded in 1871, and it still bears his name. But this was weirdly an exclusively North American phenomenon. This was not in Europe at all. And Adams' chicle-based gum was actually not the first either. The first commercially manufactured gum was actually made from spruce resin that was collected from wounds on trees, and it's actually really nice. If you've ever been hiking and you find spruce trees, the little sap that drips down from there, you can just take it right off the tree and chew it. And by all accounts, I can't confirm this, but I've read many times that this is adopted directly from Native Americans. So people who Anglos and European people who lived in the backwoods learned to chew gum from their neighbors, the Native Americans. That's proven impossible to verify. I can't tell if that's absolutely true or not. It may have been invented just as a novel way to sell a product, as they associate it with Indians, and everyone says, "Ooh, how cool!" But in any case, whatever the origin, gum appears out of nowhere. There is no habit of anyone chewing chewing gum, at least, until this, to the surprise and bewilderment of commentators on this, who suddenly find people chewing gum. So the first company to manufacture and market chewing gum was actually, this is 1848. It's John Curtis's State of Maine Pure Spruce Gum. And I do have a little box of this actually right here, and I'll show you what it looks like. There's a lump of it right there. Okay, that's spruce gum. And it shatters the minute you put it in your mouth, oddly. And then thereafter, it kind of softens with the heat of your mouth and the friction, and it's perfectly lovely chewing gum. Again, that appears out of nowhere. This is a handful of competitors start entering the markets shortly thereafter, and so for the second half of the 19th century, spruce gum actually becomes kind of familiar. You can buy it on grocery store shelves, and interestingly, again, associated with young women. And I should say also, interestingly, unless you buy from this company out of Maine that ships it in this lovely little box, spruce gum has become completely extinct in the United States. That's the only manufacturer that still makes it. There used to be several companies. Even when I was younger, Kennebec spruce gum you could find in here and there, but not anymore. You can make it yourself, though. In fact, there's a tree, I'll point it out on campus, where I regularly collect sap and chew it and process it. I take out the bark and stuff and melt it. But in any case, a few years prior, in 1843, chewing gum was unknown unless you lived in the state of Maine. And it wasn't actually primarily spruce gum. This is also a weird part of the story. Let me read you a little extract from a text that I found. And again, this is a good illustration of how you can hunt down primary sources and use them for your research. This is from Brother Jonathan's Weekly Compendium of Belles Letters and the Fine Arts, and I found it on Google Books. Okay? It declares this: can it be true that the beautiful ladies of that beautiful town, Portland, are addicted to the disgusting habit reported below? And he takes an extract then from the Portland Bulletin. It must all be libel. Of all the loathsome habits that have obtained votaries among respectable people, that of wax chewing is decidedly the most disgusting. There is reason in the ox chewing the cud, such is the will of the Creator. But for a human being, more especially a lady, to be forever crunching her jaws together and smacking her lips is alike contrary to nature and to every rule of politeness and good breeding. We were told by an apothecary the other day that a principal item of the profits in his business arose from the sale of spruce gum, burgundy pitch, no idea what that is, gum mastic, and other articles which were formerly manufactured into plasters, using, I don't know, for plastering walls or maybe for putting on your chest, but which are now bought for chewing. And it continues in these outraged tones, but at least it shows that chewing gum was unheard of. All of a sudden it's there. Oh, you know what the burgundy pitch is? Pitch is it's melted sap of pine trees that's put in a kiln, basically, so it bakes out and it turns very dark. And pitch is used to put on the sides of ships, right, for caulking them to make them waterproof, and on roofs and things. It smells great. And strangely, it goes into food also in Finland, and they have gum that's made with pitch. I swear. Okay, so I do know what it is. But in any case, getting back to my point, gum was a novel product to most Americans. It was very easily stigmatized, and the attitudes toward chewing gum to start are overwhelmingly negative. Let me give you some other examples. In a children's novel published in 1857 by Walter Amwell called Marcus, or the Boy Tamer, there's a discussion of spruce gum. And one of the characters, Kate, says, well, if everybody was like me, the spruce gum trade wouldn't be worth much. I don't see why anybody wants to chew the nasty stuff, especially a young lady. How it looks to see your jaws going the whole time. There are girls in the academy that always have their mouths full of gum. I think it's real disgusting. Chewing gum isn't quite so bad as chewing tobacco, but it's a foolish and disgusting habit, as you say, observed Marcus. This is in the novel written for kids. And obviously, it's a way to model behavior in children. They see this in the novel and they go, I didn't realize it was disgusting. Maybe I shouldn't do it. So, but it attests to the fact that now gum has become a little popular, right? And that some people think it's a sort of threat to the deportment of their children. So they're getting them these books that say, oh, don't you know, chewing gum is so disgusting and will make you look like a cow. Let me give you another quote. A physician named John Ellis, in his 1860 diatribe, The Avoidable Causes of Disease, Insanity, and Deformity, insisted that the habit of chewing spruce or other kinds of gum is becoming very prevalent, especially with children and young persons. It is a very bad habit, not only filthy and unpleasant, but also destructive to health, and parents cannot be too careful to protect against it. And his argument was this, that the production of excess saliva and subsequent swallowing destroys the digestion and then will cause all sorts of other sicknesses because your digestive acids are weakened and who knows what. But this is a doctor making the argument, okay? And that some people took grave offense at chewing gum is also evidenced by an incident in the same year that took place in Kenosha, Washington. And these are all again, primary sources that I just found online. The Times reported that a young girl of 15 was punished for chewing gum in class through by rawhiding. That's when you take a strap of leather and you whip someone with it. Okay, and I'll read this to you. We understand that it appeared in evidence that the girl was flogged across the back and bare neck with a rawhide, some 5 or 6 strokes being given, drawing blood, all for the offense of chewing gum. And the Times goes on to report that the master had been arrested for this offense. But it turned out that the jury did not agree. So they sent him back. They said, "You're acquitted." That was perfectly legitimate. A young girl chewing gum in class, you had every right to inflict corporal punishment on her. Savagery, in fact, if you think about it. And I think it shows how low in regard this act was considered by the public, by the jury, right? That they... I thought gum chewing was so disgusting. Yes, she should have been made a model of by whipping her and drawing blood. I think that's amazing that happened. So the association among popular writers, not only of gum with children, but with women in general, was another concern for people. In the Country Gentleman magazine of 1855, we find this. "Oh, ladies," a writer in an English periodical says, "we admired, as everyone must, the pretty figures and the faces of New York ladies. We admired, as everyone must, but it is a pity they follow the abominable practice of chewing the gum of spruce, which no doubt is the cause of their early loss of teeth. It is a most unbecoming habit, because the jaw is kept in perpetual motion like that of a cow ruminating. Ladies, do you chew?" And this might be evidence. Of course, it is evidence that the habit is now beyond Maine. It's in New York now. In the New Counterblast, and this is appearing in a magazine called Outdoor Papers, in a piece written by Thomas Wentworth Higginson in 1863. And it's actually written, interestingly, as a reprise to a treatise against tobacco written by King James I in the early 17th century. So it's kind of, now they're applying it to chewing gum. But let me read a little section of this. "Rustic females who chew even pitch or spruce gum are rendered thereby so repulsive that the fancy refuses to pursue the horror further and imagine it tobacco." Now that would be totally gross if they thought women were chewing and spitting tobacco juice. So another one, "The Giddy Gusher" by Mary H. Farnham Fiske, published in 1889, attests to the heightened popularity of chewing gum, especially among women at the end of the century. Quote, "It does seem as if every other woman was making a fright of herself chewing gum. Wherever you go, in stores, in cars, in church, in theaters, abroad, at home, it's chew, 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 chew. They wiggle and waggle their unceasing jaws, turn over the unending cud with restless tongue. Girls, young women, and old women, for heaven's sake, sit down before a looking-glass and look at yourself chewing gum. The practice makes you look ridiculous. It distorts your face. It cheapens your style. It endows your mug with an expression of an idiot." Of this. "I defy a girl, however pretty, to look good chewing gum." So it's perhaps in this context, I think, that we can appreciate a little spruce gum chewing vignette in chapter 7 of Mark Twain's book, Tom Sawyer. Tom is trying to woo young Becky Thatcher by asking her if she likes rats, especially swinging dead ones over your head. And Becky, of course, doesn't. But she replies that what she really likes is gum. And to which Tom says, "Yeah, I wish I had some right now, too." And Becky just pulls some out and says, "Here, you can chew this, but only under the condition that you give it back to me after you've had your turn chewing it." Okay? Now, does this make any sense? People will go, "Ew, ABC gum." It's lost its flavor, obviously. But no, actually, this passage only makes sense if you know that spruce gum, very interestingly, never, ever loses its flavor or its texture. It can literally be chewed indefinitely. You can chew it, put it somewhere, and pick it up and chew it again. And obviously the deep, and I think that's actually why we don't use spruce gum anymore. Companies would go out of business if people figured it was the everlasting gobstopper, right? But the real significance of this, apart from the association of gum with girls, is that somehow this act of sharing is a moment of intimacy. It's like a prelude to romance, and I think that's the way Tom reads into it, because in fact, what he's trying to do in this whole passage in this dialogue is trying to get her to marry him, to promise to marry him. They're young kids, right? But they end up fighting because he mentions accidentally that he was engaged to another girl first, and so it's a signal, of course, to the readers that these are still children, and not only is chewing gum childish, but in fact, so is this kind of romantic bickering, which of course adults do too, but it's childish, right? So it's a kind of parody, I think, of the whole process of romance in general, but by implication, it makes chewing gum part of the human foibles. I think that's what makes Twain such a great writer, is that he could be making fun of you, in very subtle ways like this. Nonetheless, of course, chewing gum did become popular. By the end of the century, there's a song that includes the following lyrics. Look at the change in attitude. Chewing gum is all the rage today, from the youngest to the oldest, from the gravest to the gay, in the mansion, in the hovel, in the schoolroom, in the slum, everywhere you'll see the ladies chewing gum. I wish I knew the tune to it. It's great, but the you can almost sing it, can't you? It's so the song continues. Just you watch her pretty jaws chewing gum like a sawmill, and it saws. Hear 'em hum. Now a motion, then a jerk. With what vigor they can work, masticating, that is chewing gum, and why this was possible is that the our friend Mr. Adams suddenly decided to import massive tons and tons of chicle from Mexico, and decided to have an advertising scheme. The industry had literally created a need, supplied it with a relatively inexpensive product, and not to say that chewing gum was not still the object of ridicule. It was, but everyone starts doing it right when he brings it in. And I think if we look a few decades down the road, the sophistication of manufacturing and the supply of the gum it changes entirely. By the 20s, chicle replaces spruce gum completely, and there are more and more people who are habitual chewers. Popular Science, for example, ran a story in 1920 entitled "The Gum That Gertie Chews." And notice the association is still with women, but it reads this. It says, "Does Gertie," and this is a lady, "as she rhythmically works her jaws, ever think of the chicle that she chews?" And it has pictures of people in Mexico harvesting the raw ingredient, getting it from the trees, melting the latex, and then just processing it. You've seen Gertie stretch her gum, but as you see here, a native stretched it long before it came to her. And the picture shows this guy stretching the raw chicle. And the tone of disappropriation is muted, certainly compared to previous decades, but it's still evident, despite the fact that by this point, I mean, they're looking down on this lady Gertie, really, stretching her gum. By implication, it's kind of gross. But by this point, it was estimated that 75 million people chewed gum in the U.S. That's like half the population, maybe then. And in the same year, the American druggist reported that chewing gum, though an entirely American product, was now being exported to Europe to the value of $2 million. And this is what the guy says. Before the American troops went over to France, there was practically no demand for chewing gum. In 1918, exports ranged from $78 to Iceland to $485 to Spain. Now, that was compared to a domestic market of $50 million at this point. Okay, and there's no way to know if the influence of American troops is true, but clearly it had become an export item, right? I mean, now suddenly people want it. And apparently manufacturers selling it to Britain, they had to rename the product, really very interestingly, for a very simple reason. A gum means a rubber eraser. It means the thing on the end of your pencil. That's a gum, okay, or anything that's used as an eraser. So they had to call it chewing sweets. Um, One manufacturer capitalized on the fact that the Prince of Wales was said to enjoy chewing gum while hunting, because it's difficult to smoke, while you're hunting. And another very interesting effect of the war is that troops were given gum in their ration packets. And I think that this kind of shifted the association with women. They said, let's just give it to them, and then it won't have this stigma because you'll associate it with soldiers who are strong and everything. Um, and in fact, in an article entitled "Yankee Gum Wins Europe's Favor," sorry, it says, long after chewing gum was accepted unquestionably by the American public, foreigners looked upon it with scorn and derision and treated it as an American habit to be strenuously avoided. And England apparently was the longest one to hold out, but said that now it's America's best customer. Now they want gum. And France followed right behind. And the article pointed out that it was soldiers who introduced it, and that you'll often see pictures of soldiers on the after World or during World War One, handing out packets of gum and giving it to little children, and of course they want it afterwards. So in any case, the story of chewing gum's popularity, I think, is linked directly to advertising campaigns led by Adams and, even more importantly, by Wrigley's. Wrigley's the real genius here. The Tradesman, it's a magazine for the trade, reported that nothing is quite so conclusive of the power of advertising as chewing gum, with no other adequate explanation in sight than that of the mental suggestion due to clever advertising. The American people, I'm quoting here, are chewing probably 4 or 5 times as much gum as they did a decade ago, and if anything, the taste appears to be growing. Strangely, this advertising is supported by what you might call the re-medicalization of chewing gum. That is, gum was once considered only a medicinal ingredient, and then but now they're making some medical claims, and it's giving it a kind of air of respectability. And the medical claims continue to this day. Remember, 4 out of 5 dentists recommend Trident for their patients who chew gum. I want to know what that 5th dentist objects to. But in any case, if you claim something is medicinal, then you can say, oh, well, I'm taking this for medicinal purposes. And most ingeniously, they started targeting adult men. Okay? Beeman's, for example, original Pepsin chewing gum, was advertised with absolute seriousness of purpose. That attack of dyspepsia with which you are complaining is due to one or 2 causes. Either you have overeaten or you've been working under a nervous strain, for food will not digest when you go to your meals with nerves on edge. So the gum is recommended after meals to aid digestion and relax you. And the pepsin is a digestive enzyme, supposedly, in your stomach. So that's the how it's advertised. Wrigley's Spearmint Pepsin Gum, that's what they called it, insisted that you should chew after every meal. In another ad, Wrigley's ad, a grown man is showing, it's my protection against indigestion. And so he's chewing it, and it assures me of an appetite. By stimulating saliva, it makes me want food, then helps me digest it. It purifies the breath and brightens the teeth besides. Okay, so they're making up all this stuff that it does. And advertising gives chewing gum a air of respectability. If respectable real businessmen will chew this because it makes their breath fresh and their teeth white, well, then why not everyone, right? In an advertising trade journal called Printers Ink, there's a story about how the American Chicle Company sold its salesmen on the new campaign. Read this. The principal aim of the advertising is to bring chewing gum to the serious attention of people. It's a fallacy that children chew more gum than grown-ups, or that women chew more than men. So despite the assertion that it's clear that they're targeting a new adult male audience, they're really revamping the image of chewing. This is in the trade magazine again. The advertising copy this year contains a serious note. We show that the practice of chewing gum is not in itself objectionable. And then it explains that they will start to make these medical claims and assert that chewing gum is good for relieving tension, that it's good for athletes. The magazine advertising will appear in high-class monthlies and weeklies. The typography will be plain and dignified. In other words, this whole massive advertising campaign was planned from the beginning. They wanted to change the social meaning of chewing gum, and of course they succeeded. If they found new ways to advertise, four or five hundreds of dailies ran advertisements for chewing gum. We'll look at some of those in class. Streetcars had advertisements, painted bulletins, posters they put up everywhere. This costs a lot of money, but of course it works. Um, Movie theaters, public halls started selling it or giving it away as samples and to get people hooked. And the means of transmitting this message were as revolutionary as the new product itself. And I can't think of another example of a food that is so quickly changed in meaning, and becomes respectable. Um, the ads, if you look at them, also reveal that now old folks approve of chewing gum, and they think of it as something traditional. Um, and the I think the effect on women's deportment also changed entirely. One Wrigley's ad said, "Rain or shine, double mint gum helps keep your facial contours young and lovely." And it shows this beautiful young woman, of course, with no suggestion at all that she's chewing or cut or anything. It's saying that it keeps your muscles and your neckline tight and makes you look young. It's the complete night and day change. Um, and William Wrigley was the first to really prove that advertising dollars pay off. He said in one year his ad bill was $3.5 million. And he said this: "I'm spending $11,000 a day to advertise my chewing gum, and America has become a chewing gum nation." He turned out 43 million sticks of gum a day to meet this demand. And these decades, I think you can consider them the golden age of chewing gum. The stigma was, overcome. The industry was rapidly expanding. And when the Society of Civil Engineers met, they visited the new American Chicle Company factory in Long Island City. They were astonished to find that there was a 5-story building taking up an entire city block. The American confectioner reported, "It seems almost incomprehensible that the manufacture of an article such as chewing gum, the butt of many jokes in the past, should now require a plant which in mere size would do credit to a pretentious industry." In other words, this is a huge factory. And the popularity of chewing gum as a kind of ordinary homespun habit was aided by one very fascinating figure. We'll take a look at some images of him and maybe a video. Is Will Rogers. Will Rogers used to chew gum as part of his whole routine, and I think he partly popularized it, and knew he did. He actually went to Catalina Island, where Wrigley had a home, and he said he expected to meet the guy, and he wasn't allowed in. This was sort of a running joke of his. He says this: "I know I've contributed more to the building of that home than anyone living. I have made chewing gum not only a pastime, but I've made it an art." Okay, and this is this hilarious stand-up routine, of Will Rogers about what do you do with used gum, and Rogers suggests that they start collecting it from the bottom of movie theater seats, and he says everyone will yield half a pint every 2 days, and then they'll recycle it, and under the aegis of the Remodeled Chewing Gum Corporation, which is really just hilarious. So, in any case, by the time Will Rogers could do a comic routine about gum, the image had changed. Gum was still once in a while considered uncouth or associated with a certain class of women, but sort of something also kind of honest and lacking in pretension and sort of homespun, like Will Rogers himself, of course. But it had become mainstream, and again, only because of advertising. Now we can talk also about how the image of gum has changed today. We still have it around, but it's like, I wouldn't call it déclassé necessarily, but it's seen as being a little gross. Certainly if you blow bubbles or you crack your gum or do something like that. So we'll talk about that in class, and I'll see you next time.